All the way back in 1794, the earliest chapter of this nation as an independent nation, the legendary preacher, educator, and writer Richard Allen, who was born into slavery, founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, or AME Church, in Philadelphia. It was the first independent black denomination in the United States. And it is not overstating things to say it is one of the most important institutions in this country's history. And this was the foundational black church, a sanctuary for African Americans under the boot of slavery and persecution, to worship and to congregate and to fight for civil rights and for dignity and for equality. And then in the 1820s and 1830s, black worshipers founded two AME churches in Washington, D.C., specifically Israel Bethel and Union Bethel. And the reason they did it was because of disaffection from two mostly white Methodist congregations, which required African Americans to sit in the gallery. These churches threw themselves into the cause of abolishing slavery, and they were stations on the Underground Railroad, and church leaders worked to increase literacy and to lift up black Americans. And in 1872, those churches merged to become Metropolitan AME, which is one of the oldest black churches in D.C. and a legendary center of black life to this day. The very first elected African-American senator to serve a full term, that would be Blanche Bruce of Mississippi during Reconstruction. He was a member. And in 1894, Frederick Douglass gave his final speech there, calling for an end to segregation and American apartheid. Douglass's funeral was held inside the same church the next year. And then more than a century later, Metropolitan AME hosted the funeral of another civil rights pioneer, legendary activist Rosa Parks. This church has witnessed the tortured history of racial oppression in this country and the centuries-old battle for equality, dignity, self-determination under God to make real the promise that Black Lives Matter. And when the nation went through a brutal reckoning this year in protests over racial injustice, Metropolitan AME, unsurprisingly, put up a Black Lives Matter sign. And then this weekend, a bunch of marauding supporters of the president came to downtown D.C., and they gleefully tore that sign down. This is what it looked like. Metropolitan AME's pastor, Reverend William H. Lamar IV, responded in the Washington Post today that, quote, "It mattered not the sign was ours. The mythology that motivated the perpetrators on Sunday night was the underbelly of the American narrative. That white men can employ violence to take what they want and do what they want and call that criminality justice, freedom, and liberty." Metropolitan AME was not the only historic black church where this happened. What appeared to be Trump supporters also ripped down a Black Lives Matter banner from Asbury United Methodist Church, which dates back to 1836. And then they set the banner on fire. The senior pastor of Asbury United said that that scene that you just saw for him was reminiscent of cross burnings. There have been many, many moments of disgusting bigotry that have emanated from the movement that supports this current president. But desecrating two churches that have borne witness to this nation's struggle for equality, tearing up burning signs that simply assert that the lives of Black Americans matter, well, that's about as low as it gets.